So, Kevin, I've broke the number one rule in Star Wars fandom, and I went down the rabbit hole of Screen Rant articles, and I came across
That place is a hot mess.
It's so fun though; like you can just get in there. So
Some
either
of the
way,
craziest stuff.
yeah. So if you're not familiar with Screen Rant, no offense to the website or all the clickbait that they have. Some stuff is like super interesting, like what we're going to talk about today, but you can get in like a doom scroll and just read the craziest like Star Wars theories, which is what I was doing. So this one is about Ahsoka. And since there's been some Ahsoka season 2 news lately and a few things here and there come out about it, I thought it would be fun to talk about this crazy theory that I saw. So I'll link the article below for y'all to read later if you want to. But essentially, it's talking about the world between worlds and Abeloth and the Mortis gods and Ahsoka, and they're on Peridea, and it's just kind of lumping Abeloth into all of that. So I'm not gonna like dig too far into it, but essentially they're saying Anakin may not be who we think Anakin is. So that's where we're going. And again, this is just like wild speculation. The title of this video will probably have the word wild in it, like wild theory or something like that. But it's always fun to speculate. There's nothing else going on in Star Wars. Like there's outlaws and that's had its own issues. So like, we'll refrain from that. But I've got the article pulled up. And so
quick shout out though.
Yes,
we do
go
have
ahead.
Rebuild the Galaxy coming up.
Oh, that is coming out.
Is that like next week, I think?
Hold on.
That looks like a lot of fun right there.
It is going to be fun. Rebuild the Galaxy comes out September 13th. So today, as of filming, is September 5th. So 8 days. So not on next week's episode, but the week after, maybe we can do we'll talk about Rebuild the Galaxy or something. So there is something going on in Star Wars, I suppose. So I have like a dog hair on me, and I always like try not to have that while I'm filming, but nonetheless, I do. So either way, this Screen Rant article, it's titled 1 year later, new evidence supports the most exciting Ahsoka theory of all. And so just going to kind of skip through this. But yeah, so Screen Rant actually does do a cool thing where they list like the 3 main bullet points from the article. So you actually can just like do it real quick and see if you're even interested. But essentially, the runes that you see in Ahsoka, and they from the premiere, right, in that first article or the first episode where she's like looking for that star map, it reveals a cryptic message about the 3 who possess great knowledge and protect a secret way. If that was the only like summary, I would have read the whole article just after that. So it's a very interesting theory. So I'll throw a picture up for those watching this, just like showing you the runes and everything. But it's got like, it's like a poem, if you will, I guess, or something along those lines. And it's talking about what we think are the Mortis gods. It would make a lot of sense. And so this is what people have translated it to. So 3 there were who made the journey, without whose knowledge there is no returning. A pathway connecting near and far, across the heavens, star to star. Despite great powers which do object, the secret way the 3 protect. So heed the path with watchful eye, for if you wander, you will die. That's like Harry Potter level stuff right there, right? Like, I feel like it kind of feels like a prophecy, that way about it. But I mean, it's talking about 3 there were who made the journey. So I'm assuming the 3 being the Mortis gods.
Yeah.
Father, son, daughter. That seems like it makes a lot of sense here. The journey appears to be to Peridea. That's what I would say here. Says they're not going back. Pathway connecting near and far across the heavens, star to star. It sounds like different galaxies, I would say. And they are protecting something. So all of the Star Wars people who are familiar with Abeloth all seem to think that it could be that that's what they're protecting. So if you read through the article a little bit more, it talks about how potentially the world between worlds is actually just the prison that the Mortis gods have made for Abeloth, and we may be getting a new bad guy in Ahsoka, or I guess bad girl in this case. So for those who don't know who Abeloth is, Kevin, the resident Star Wars lore expert, can you please explain very briefly who Abeloth is?
Very briefly, yeah.
Very briefly. Like, you've got 5 minutes.
Oh, well, that I could do a lot in 5 minutes.
Well, I know you could also do it in 25. So
that's fair. Yeah, no, Abeloth is she's heavily connected with the Mortis gods. So Mortis gods first show up in the Clone Wars, right? And then some of the novelizations in the EU kind of ran with that and decided to build this villain. It was actually in the New Jedi Order series of books to build this villain and connect them with these gods that were introduced in Clone Wars. So essentially, long before they ended up on Mortis, they were on this other planet, and she ends up stranded there as a human. She kind of becomes the mother to the family, kind of helps keep the son and daughter in check. She starts to worry about dying, so she drinks from these force pools. It like super corrupts her. She turns super evil and becomes this. It's really one of the weirder things in Star Wars because it's almost like this eldritch entity. Like it's like teeth and tentacles and like shifting.
Yeah, it looks scary.
It's all sorts of weirdness. Like it kind of dips a little bit into like the cosmic horror stuff. And then so the Mortis gods, they find a way to imprison her, and they peace out. And so within the EU, that's how they end up on Mortis. They kind of move to another, like this other nexus of the Force, and reside there. And then they keep her in check throughout time, of course, until they die. But yeah, that's kind of the very brief Abeloth.
No, I think that works out pretty well. And so given what we know from Ahsoka, which is very brief, it's probably like what a 10-second scene at the very end where Balin's skull is out there walking on the father is the statue, right? Like he's pointing out, and so Balin's like walking out to the hand there, and he's pointing at something. Like, isn't in the distance, like there's a tower with a light.
Yeah, a mountain or something.
Yeah, so he's pointing out at something. The head of the daughter, I think it's the daughter, is like clipped off. And then you see the son over next to her. So, or next to the father. So that's interesting in and of itself. So we already know, okay, the 3 Mortis gods, there's something going on in Peridea. So we have this rune translation that is that there are 3 who've made the journey. I mean, we can pretty much confirm, right? Like that's it seems as if it's gotta be them.
Like you have to think that at the end of Ahsoka, you don't get these giant statues for no reason, right? Like that's a pretty big. If it's just an Easter egg, that's a pretty big and kind of pointless Easter egg, right? Like, there's definitely plot continuation there, and so these runes that were planted in there from Episode 1, like they really just kind of solidify that this planet has something strongly to do with the Mortis gods, right? And that not just that maybe they came from there, that maybe they left something there, and that for some reason they're guarding the knowledge to get there. And so it's really interesting, and I think it definitely. I think for a lot of people who are kind of hoping that was the case, I think it did kind of really bring home that okay, this really does seem to be where they're going to go with this.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking through when you were saying that, like, there's no other 3 it could be, because, like, it was Ahsoka, and this is, like, something translated, so I don't think it's, like, a prophetic type thing in Star Wars, so, like, I don't think it's referring to, well, Ahsoka came with just Huyang, then Sabine came with Morgan Elsbeth, Shin, and Balin, so that's 4 there, so those numbers don't add up. So I think it's got to be the Mortis gods.
The only other speculation I've seen was that it was those three, like, grandmothers or whatever. The night mothers.
There were three of them.
But they don't seem to be guarding the way to Peridia.
They're getting out of there.
Yeah, they're wanting out.
They want out of there quickly, like they know something is up.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. Throughout the episode, they seem eager to get off planet.
Yeah. They want out of there.
Yeah, and the whole thing.
Thrawn's lost a lot of troopers there, right? He's only got undead troopers. Something's going on.
And we can't forget, like, Balin feels a call to something significant, right? Like, that was one of the things that I felt like they really just dropped off with is he kind of has these mysterious lines about this thing calling to him.
Mm-hmm.
And they just kind of leave it at that. So there's something, like, there's something significant on Peridia.
Yeah.
So
and Dave and Jon Favreau as well, but like in their storytelling in The Mandalorian, there will just be random things here and there throughout The Mandalorian that have ended up, matriculating into what we've got now, right? So you've got like Boba Fett, the jingle jangles on his boots. You hear that in the first season of The Mandalorian. Then he shows up in the second season. Then you get a whole season of Boba Fett stuff. Yeah. And so you got that going on. And then you have, like, Bo-Katan shows up just for a little bit. But then, like, later on, you've got a whole Mandalore arc going on, like, with her leading it. So I don't think within their little, storytelling strategy that a lot goes for nothing. So I think that they're probably, it's going to be them. Yeah. That's where we're going. And I think if you went back and like watched our post Ahsoka stuff, which has been like almost a year now, so don't hold past us to what we said, but I'm pretty sure we probably were leaning towards them coming back before this whole Mandalorian movie and like fighting Thrawn and going into that. And just so Dave Filoni did that little sketch where like he's writing season 2, and the sketch he drew is like Ahsoka with the Mortis gods, like on that little ledge. Then you've got this, and you say like, okay, this is tying more into the Mortis gods. Then this week you have Sabine Wren actress, Natasha Liu Bordizzo. She says they're going to start filming in summer of 2025. Yeah. Well, they can't film in summer 2025 and have the season out. I don't think they can do it and have it out before the Mandalorian movie. That would be like,
so.
Well, I guess they could if they started in like June, wrapped up by August, and then had like 8 months of whatever just to get it in like by the finish line. Because Rise of Skywalker was done in like 18 months, and that was a movie. So
yeah.
I mean, you could, but also that didn't turn out very great.
Right.
So.
I do think, especially with like this new stuff that came out, like it really does seem like they've decided to part these two pathways.
That's what I was. Because
if they do really dive into a Mortis Gods Abeloth kind of plot, Mando doesn't really fit in with that, right? Like he's got his own story.
It's mystical, yeah.
It is. This is very much a story of the Force, so. I think if this is the case, they need to separate, right? And so I'd be fine with that. I think we did at the time think that they were going to come back together and deal with Thrawn. But now it does very much seems like Ahsoka's path is not Thrawn, right? That it's this other thing with the Mortis gods that they really seem to be moving towards, which I'm like I said, I'm glad about.
Yeah.
Because if they're going to go into it, I'd rather them commit fully to it and not try to split it between arcs and characters.
Well, and nothing against The Mandalorian. I think it's the greatest Disney Star Wars, like, as a whole that they've done. Yeah. So, like, it's certainly brought a lot of eyeballs to the franchise. We've talked about that. But Ahsoka, to a lot of Star Wars fans, doesn't need to play second fiddle to the Mandalorian story. I'm one of those Star Wars fans. So it appears, and I mean, who else is one of those Star Wars fans? Dave Filoni. So, he's not going to have Ahsoka playing second fiddle to nobody. So he's going to continue her story, it appears, in a different galaxy. He's just, I think, in The Rise of Skywalker, he didn't have much to do with that, I wouldn't think. So you have Ahsoka's voice there at the end. and you assume she's dead, but who says she's dead? I feel like Dave is just circumventing all of that, and he's got Ahsoka in a different galaxy doing her own thing, and he's got his own little sandbox he can still tell a story in. And so everything that happens out there, you have got zero issue. Like, you're not going to run into, the sequel trilogy timeline where, okay, we've only got like 20 something years of story that you can tell before we get into this First Order Resistance story. But if you keep her in Peridia in another galaxy and really like a time warping almost situation with the World Between Worlds type stuff, you can tell as much as you want. You can go forward, backwards, however you want to do it. There's nothing messing with anything there. So, I mean, I like the idea that it's focusing on the Mortis gods, focusing on Ahsoka, Abeloth being this bad villain. I love it. I think it's a genius idea to, the Mandalorian brought us into it, and then it goes on its own and tells its story. I like that a lot.
Yeah, agree. And you were talking about, what Ahsoka's fate is. If we do dive into the World Between Worlds stuff, like, we know there's already some interaction, right, between the two. Like, it doesn't really change things is kind of the message we get about the World Between Worlds. But that there is some sort
thus far.
Yeah, that's right. Thus far. There is some sort of movement between the two, though, right? That's the only way Ezra can
It's the only way Ahsoka lives.
Ahsoka. And so, does she end up in some capacity, staying in the World Between Worlds at the end of her story, and
that'd be cool.
She's able to speak back into time. There's lots of pathways they can do that without her being dead. And so it'll be interesting to see where her storyline ultimately goes. At the end of whatever this is that Filoni's doing.
Right.
I think a lot of people are looking forward to where her story finishes up.
It's my most look forward to thing whenever we get there.
I would agree with that.
So that was a lot there for us to say that we think that the three in that deciphering translation, the Mortis gods, okay? Where this theory gets kind of wild, though, is where it's saying, okay, yes, they're there, but the little translation says they're guarding something, right? So, like, I'm pretty sure it says something like that. Let me read it again.
They're guarding
just to make
the
sure
way
I'm not
for some
fabricating. So they're the secret way the three protect. So heed the path with watchful eye, for if you wander, you will die. So they're protecting somebody from something big. That takes you straight to Abeloth, just from what you said.
It indicates there's something that doesn't want it to stay hidden, right?
Yes, there's a greater threat.
When Abeloth called to people, that was one of the ways by which she made her escape, is she needed to be discovered. So
that's the call to Balin's skull right there.
Could be.
I think it's got to be. It just makes too much sense. Like, sometimes the thing that makes the most sense is just what happens.
But this theory, though, is it based on the premise that it is Abeloth. That Abeloth is...
So we're functioning off that assumption. So Abeloth is the one calling. They're protecting her. So the theory is they created the World Between Worlds, so the Mortis gods. And I think there's a lot to that you could say, that probably did happen within what we know of canon. And so they created the World Between Worlds as a prison for Abeloth. So in EU and Legends, what was it called that they hid her away in?
It was called the Maw.
The Maw. Okay.
Yeah. So they essentially moved a bunch of like nebulas and black holes to surround, so that it was basically inaccessible. You couldn't get through.
Okay.
The Maw, fun fact, the Maw was in Legends is where the Death Star was built.
So, okay. Very cool.
The Empire had a facility there.
It's probably easier, storytelling-wise, to make the World Between Worlds that thing without introducing something new. Yeah. So this theory says that the World Between Worlds is the prison. So I think for Abeloth. So then it goes on to say that Ahsoka is when she's in the World Between Worlds in episode 5 of Ahsoka, that she's not actually talking with Anakin. It's Abeloth there that she's dealing with. Now that is crazy. That's like way out there. And it's like Abeloth messing with Ahsoka, but trying to, I guess, get her back into the game so she can get to where she's going. And so, which would be prettiest. So, that's an interesting theory. Let's kind of walk through this without getting all the way to that Anakin part first. One, I agree with it in that the Mortis gods did make the world between worlds. If it's not this already existing type thing, I think they probably have something to do with it, because you have Morai kind of flying around in Rebels. When Ezra ends up in there, right? Isn't that what happens? Like you see the owl. Yeah. So Morai is essentially always hearkening us back to the Mortis gods from the Clone Wars. So there's a connection there already.
That Mortis itself, like when they pulled, Obi-Wan and Anakin and Ahsoka to it, it kind of seemed to exist in a different place, right? Like, they were kind of there, and then they just weren't there. So it does indicate that they have this ability to kind of move between spaces, and it makes sense.
Yeah, like Mortis is not like it's not designated as a physical place we know of, right? Like as far as canon goes, we know it exists, but
to me, it's kind of like, the cosmic force and the living force already had a place they meet. It's almost like they just built a structure around it, right? Like a place that almost makes sense of it, that kind of allows it. And so it is an interesting, I think that makes sense if they would have built it to move freely kind of from place to place and to learn and to see. And it seems kind of something within the vein of what they would be doing.
Yeah. Well, I think also we associate a lot of Ahsoka with the world between worlds.
It's true.
But Ezra was the one who got there first through that temple. Right. So it makes you wonder if because like I'm tying the Mortis gods in with it, with the fact that Ahsoka has this connection with it, because Ahsoka theoretically is the daughter, or what's left of the daughter, right? Like that's kind of the prevailing
like her
theory,
life forces in her.
Yeah. So, I like that connection there, because we do see her in there a lot. But at the same time, you could argue it going, well, actually, Ezra found it on Lothal, and so that was actually around Ezra, not around Ahsoka. And then, but if you go there, I mean, Ezra was also on Peridia, so like there's that connection anyways.
And we can talk about it in a minute, but with her being kind of already connected with the daughter, there is an interesting connection with what Abeloth's overall arching plan was within the books. But we'll get to that. Yeah, it's kind of interesting though. But yeah, in terms of this though, like, so the theory is that they built it and imprisoned her within it.
Yep. To keep her out.
That makes sense. I mean, where else do you imprison like an incredibly powerful force entity, except a place that has no clear entrance and exit?
Right. So, and if she's this most powerful thing, she's the only threat that they could be worried about.
Yeah.
You would assume. That's what the theory says. Is like, well, if they're worried about hiding something, there's really only one thing that they're actually worried about, and that is the mother getting out, Abeloth getting out. So, I think up to that point, this theory is pretty good. Right? Like, that seems like
it makes complete sense to me. Because, I mean, like, you have to have somewhere where she's being kept dormant, right? Like, we don't have them all in this iteration of the Star Wars galaxy. So it seems like the next best place would be this mysterious force realm that is incredibly hard to get into, right? And that even when you get into it, you're not really there. You kind of get kicked out eventually. Ezra couldn't stay there. The Emperor kind of got in there a little bit, but we saw that he wasn't really in there, right? And so
he tried, like he was just almost get in there. So I think yes, up to that point, but then we're like the speculation starts veering to where, well, what if that was actually Abeloth as Anakin versus actually Anakin in the world between worlds?
Well, before we get into whether that makes sense or not, personally, I hope that's not.
It doesn't. Well, it doesn't make sense, but
I hope that's not the case, because I don't want to lose that interaction between Anakin and Ahsoka.
Ahsoka.
So if that is true, then that interaction that we thought we had and we thought we saw just doesn't exist, right? She never actually did learn anything from Anakin. She never had that lesson that she got there, and so hopefully that's not the case. Plus, we see Anakin at the end. Force Ghost. So
it kind of gives the affirmation
it seems like a follow up of
you did
I just
make
saw
it.
you here and now I'm So
the nodding approval, Well, it's again, this is why it's a wild theory. I don't think that it is. But the idea in this article is like, what if Abeloth was like testing Ahsoka in this situation to see if she could be the one to get her out? Because being in that time, space, whatever, she would potentially know where it goes from there. So is she trying to get Ahsoka there? Again, why would you bring Hayden in just to, be like, actually, it wasn't Anakin?
There is some interesting merit to the idea that Abeloth would be calling to Ahsoka, though.
Well, there's a lot of interesting merit because Ahsoka's the daughter.
Yeah, and in the culmination of those new Jedi Order books, like you find out ultimately her plan was she wanted to recreate the family. So she ends up with Ben Solo, not Kylo Ren Ben Solo, Luke Skywalker's son Ben Solo,
the OG,
Ben Solo, and a Sith girl. What was her name?
Was it Ben or Jason Solo?
Astara Kai. Ben Solo. Jason Solo messed up some
He's
things.
the bad guy.
He became Darth Caedus.
Got it.
Wreaked some havoc. He has which neither here nor there. He has a really cool sequence within those books where Luke and Ben Solo get to talk to him. And he's not really remorseful about what he did. He's just kind of like, it is what it is. The galaxy's at peace now. Maybe I played a part in that. It's a really interesting. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Cool character though. But Ben Solo in this, she's from the Lost Tribe of the Sith. I think her name's like Astara Kai or something.
Okay.
So Abeloth tries to get them to drink from this font in this spring to become, I think she calls Ben like her Prince of Light and something, Daughter of Dark. I don't know, something. She had terms for him. But she wanted to recreate
some
her
cool
Mortis
writing.
Family.
Yeah.
She wanted to basically she wanted to be the father. She wanted to be the one in the middle with a son and a daughter and recreate that Mortis family because she was obsessed with it, right? Like that was why she drank from those fonts. And so if we're doing Abeloth, is that her plan, right? Like, is she trying to recreate the family by
Baylan, Ahsoka, her?
So I don't know if, and she used a lot of tools though, people as tools, right? Like, so Baylan might just be the thing that gets her out, because that was in the book. She called a Jedi to her. She like drained her life force, then she could take her form. She's kind of like shapeshift between them, and so it's interesting. Like it could be interesting to see maybe it go that way to where she's calling to Ahsoka because she wants her to become part of her family, and kind of take her place there.
I think that is a natural progression.
We've talked about Hayden as possibly the father, but maybe she tries to get Anakin as the son. I don't know. That would be interesting.
Yeah, I would like for Anakin to stay as the father. like as far as like,
I think it fits well with the light dark
this
concept.
light and dark, perfect light, perfect darkness. But also it would make sense that like there's this pull. Does it turn into this pull? Saying like, first of all, it's going to be Anakin that was in the World Between Worlds. So like say we get past that, and you've got like Abeloth pulling one side, but you have Anakin pulling the other, and trying to like, is that the direction this goes? I think that would be pretty cool, because then you get this reasoning also for why Anakin's Force Ghost, aside from in that Shadows of the Sith book, is essentially non-existent during this time period. Like, oh, how does Anakin not go tell Ben Solo that he's an idiot? Well, he's busy trying to save the entire all of everything,
all of the Force
in this situation. Does he end up trapped? Does his Force Ghost get trapped in the World Between Worlds? I don't know. Like, there's a lot of stuff there. So that's why I would say, yes, Abeloth may be trapped in the World Between Worlds, but that was Anakin also.
And it is interesting. So if we go with the idea that Abeloth is in prison there, does that mean Anakin, who has found his way there somehow or been called to there, does he not really have a way out? That would be interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I mean, it could be the case because they can always ignore the books if they want to. Like, they always got that back door out, but But Anakin in the Shadow of the Sith book, like, he can barely appear to Luke, but it's not because of that. It's because
it's just his familiarity with the Force.
Well, it was because of it took everything he could to like save him because of like the darkness that was rising or something, and it was like clouding stuff out. So like, he shows up on Exegol in Force Ghost form and saves Luke, who was in Exegol because he was on
I haven't read that. I still need to read that book.
The planet where Grogu does the Seeing Stone. Luke was there, and he gets transported to Exegol and like this vision. Anakin saves him. So like, I think Anakin can be to and fro. Yeah. But I do like the idea that at some point, all of his attention is out in a different galaxy. Yeah. And so that's like, he assumes Yoda and Obi-Wan could handle the rest of the Force ghosting, I guess. I don't know. That would make a lot of stations. That would be a way to ride around it. But at the same time, would the World Between Worlds even have to be the prison? Because it seems as if you're in a different galaxy guarding one specific thing, but if like people could get into this World Between Worlds when they're in the normal galaxy, then maybe it also excludes that.
So, and obviously the great thing about the fact that this stuff is Legends is you can keep a lot like Thrawn, right? Like you can keep the core of a character without the surrounding plot having to match up, right? And so, in the EU stuff, Abeloth was freed when time got messed up. Like when people shifted the flow of time, which is what Jason Solo did. It tended to loosen her bonds. There wasn't really a great explanation for that as to why. It would make more sense in this context, right? Like the World Between Worlds being affected by like movements in time. So I think that would make sense.
It's almost like time travel.
Yeah. So with Ezra affecting things, and then if Anakin is pulling Ahsoka in and that affecting things, maybe this is loosening the grip on Abeloth. But you don't have to do that, right? Like you could just say, she's imprisoned in this place on Peridia, and she just needs a Force user to awaken her, essentially. Like you could do that. It doesn't change who the character will be or the havoc that they could wreak. It's just a different means of confinement. So, I like the idea that she could be imprisoned in the World Between Worlds because I think that just that place is fascinating. But
well, also, so this theory as well does make a little bit of sense in one way. So, like the portal on Lothal is destroyed.
Yeah.
The Purgil and Ezra ship off from Lothal to Peridia. So what if there's an entrance in Lothal where someone can get in, then people can be pulled in, right? So like Ahsoka gets pulled in when she's on, is it Malachor? Is that where they were fighting? And Rebels?
Yes. Yeah.
So they're in that temple. But what if the only two accessible points are Peridia and Lothal? And so then you can't get in on Lothal anymore. So the only way Abeloth could get out of the World Between Worlds is Peridia at this point. So that's why she's calling people there to get her out from Peridia. And then if the Lothal portal has been destroyed and there's only one person in the World Between Worlds who can pull people into it, does she pull Ahsoka in when she falls into the water there to save her, then to get her there? Then she could be Anakin, right? Like she pulled in and then acts as Anakin to get her going.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. And it makes sense, the idea that if they created this World Between Worlds and they came from Peridia to Lothal, that makes sense as to why Lothal might be like this, have this strong Force presence, like the Lothals and the Jedi Temple.
It makes a lot of good connection.
But like maybe that's the source of like a lot of these planets that have Force presences, like these nexuses. Maybe there's like a World Between Worlds gateway there. Maybe these are all places that they connected and it just created. That would be a cool explanation.
That would be
like a Force nexus.
Yeah. Like when it would open up a lot of cool stories too.
That'd be interesting. But yeah, it'll be interesting if there is a way out now between the World Between Worlds, or if that's closed. Like, is that done? I thought about that.
Well, that's the only way that I could make it make sense that's Abeloth instead of Anakin in there. Is if Ezra only got in because he found one of the two entrances,
right?
And so he gets in that way. Destroyed, Abeloth can't get out. So then Abeloth fakes as Anakin, pulls Ahsoka in from that one situation, and then puts her back out so she can still get to Peridian.
Yeah.
That's all I can make of it.
And it may be too, like, we're just speculating at this point. Maybe
this is all just random.
Maybe you can only loosely connect with the world between worlds if you don't actually go through a door. So maybe that's why Ahsoka's experience is more dreamlike, right? It doesn't really feel like she's in a place the way Ezra was.
A lot different,
because she got pulled in differently. It wasn't like she walked through a doorway. Maybe you can't really be there in its full capacity without going through a doorway. I don't know.
That's a good point. So really, I'm torn between two schools of thought here. Is Anakin as the chosen one, does he just have access to all that is? You know what I mean? Like the Force and everything like that? Because I think that's a very easy way for them to like ease in on all this. Like, this world between worlds exists, and Anakin can do whatever he wants because he's, the perfect embodiment of the Force. But the other train of thought, I really like the prison idea. Like that it's the prison for Abeloth. I don't know which one I lean to more. Like one is a very safe bet, and the other is incredibly more interesting if it's actually a prison.
I think both could be true, though. You just have to be specific about why she's imprisoned in there and why Anakin's not, right? Like, I think you could do both.
But Palpatine wants to be in there really bad.
He does, yeah. He thinks there's a lot of power to be had being in there. So
yeah. What if she was calling to Palpatine?
Who knows?
That's cool. If he ties this story way back and like
maybe that's how he initially discovers it and tries to find his way in there because he hears a calling. That'd be cool.
That would be really cool if they show that on screen. Maybe like you've got Palpatine in live action again. That'd be pretty cool. So that's the crazy theory, cool speculation, stuff. Whatever. Like again, if you were just listening to that and you're like, wow, that was all over the place. It certainly was, but again, you clicked on a video that said wild theory, so that's what you got. So
here's one of the things that's really interesting to me is this is a direction Star Wars hasn't really gone yet, right? Like
not even
Star
remotely
Wars
close.
On the screen.
The books have,
right, and so it's going to be really interesting to see how it's received. If they decide to do this, how it goes, because they did some weird stuff in the books, right? Like Luke Skywalker fell in love with a Jedi on a computer on a ship, right? Like like that's weird, right? I mean, I mean, they dealt with these like hive mind insects that were like they like indoctrinated some Jedi, but they were also connected with the Mortis gods. Like there's all sorts of weird stuff in the books.
I'm gonna have to read this book now.
Luke fights an interdimensional alien thing in the Crystal Star, right? Like there's weird stuff, but none of that's been like live action's been pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
right. You look at
the world between worlds. Is the least straightforward thing we've ever had in Star Wars.
Like that's it. Like with animation, the Mortis gods and the world between worlds is really the biggest breach from kind of the level Star Wars sci-fi, right?
It's super cosmic. Like
it'll be interesting to see. How that feels on the screen for Star Wars when it hasn't been on the screen for Star Wars. I mean, the books were great, the stories were great. So if you haven't caught up,
so far it's been good. So far so good. Well, and the other thing too,
I'm curious how it'll be received overall.
I've read a lot of the canon Star Wars books, like that are officially canon now. I would say most of them that are not the High Republic ones. Again, I will get into those someday. It's just not this day. But I've read a lot of them, and the canon books now are so structured. Like it's nothing like what the EU books were before. They're keeping. I mean, straight down the line, and so smart move probably. But this is like the most EU stuff we've seen, and I think it's just going to keep going that way.
Yeah, and I mean the difference is, like Lucas didn't really care about what stories were told because he didn't consider them part of his movie canon, right?
Yeah, it was just
these are the stories I've told, and I love the idea that people are going to make cool stories out of. Right? Which is a cool approach to that, right? To let people run off with it and make their own things. There was a loose like Lucas group that kind of oversaw plot points and stories so that you couldn't do like the most ridiculous things and destroy Star Wars. Right. Yeah, it's very different with Disney, right? Like they have their thumb on everything. Like everything is in line with, well, no, we have this plan, so it's got to line up with this. This has to line up with this.
They're more intentional with their books than they are what they put on screen.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. I get it. I get why you have to do it now that you're really spreading out Star Wars to all these other media outlets and you want them to match. I get that. It was a lot easier when you had 3 movies, a bunch of books, and then 6 movies and a bunch of books, right? That was it. So, I don't know.
I think it's fun though. Like in this period, like we're in a time frame between the Acolyte and Skeleton Crew. So like speculation is fun. So I mean, just sitting and it's been a year since the Shadow Warrior episode of Ahsoka. Like we get to talk about all of that. Like that's just a lot of fun, kind of digging back into that story. And the World Between Worlds is always a fun topic. The few times we've talked about Abeloth within the World Between Worlds and all that. I mean, it's so easy, as you can see from our conversation, for our minds just to go everywhere. So I think it's a lot of fun. And like, I'm kind of sad that it's going to be 2026 until
it's a long time.
we get this show.
Yeah, it's a long time.
But again, very happy, I think, that it's going to diverge from that Mandalorian story.
Yeah. And one more thing before we go. I'm curious.
Yes.
Do you think, so with this news and knowing that this really has kind of split paths now, do you think Skeleton Crew ends up having ties more to Mando or Ahsoka?
Mando. I don't think so. My prediction before was, because it was very vague, where it was like they're lost in a dangerous galaxy, is what like the promotion was for it. And so I was adamant that they're going to get lost and end up in Peridia, and that's how they're going to get Ahsoka back. I don't think Ahsoka's coming back ever. So I think
the only thing I think about though is they do meet up with this Force guy. And it does seem like there's going to be some connection to the Jedi. So I wonder if there's any part of Skeleton Crew that's supposed to better introduce or enrich some other ideas about the Mortis gods before we get to Ahsoka. Because that's not going to happen in Mando, right? So do they try to bridge that with like a little more information or a little more Easter eggs or a little more tidbits?
They might like...
I think it'd be cool.
Well, they've already mentioned Easter eggs. So, like, that there's going to be a lot of them. So maybe there are Easter eggs. Like, Marvel used to be the king of Easter eggs. I suppose they, still are, but no one watches Marvel anymore to know about it. But I guess they watch Deadpool. But that's Sony Marvel, right? Like, so they're still doing it good. But, maybe they drop some hints about it, but not necessarily tie into it. I think Dave's going at...
Do you think
Dave's going at this one on his own.
Do you think Skeleton Crew ties back heavily into the Mandoverse? Or
Mando,
do you think
yes.
It just kind of pieces of it?
Yeah, Mando probably ends up saving them or something like that. Like he's in retirement and ends up having to save him while he's retired. Like some way it's going to tie back to that, or like they run across Luke Skywalker or Ezra, or something like that. Like it'll tie back that way. I think. I think I need to kiss those dreams of them going to get Ahsoka from Peridia goodbye.
I don't think that'll happen at this point, but I think a part of me wishes that's where the Force stuff in this series maybe went a little more. It's like
it's where I want all the Force stuff to go.
They discover some Mortis stuff.
Yeah.
We need more Mortis.
So. But it's exciting because, like, you're looking at, like, probably getting into 2030 still telling a Mortis story, like, if they're going at this every few years pace. So it's pretty cool. So, I mean, a lot of fun. Next week, Kevin will not be here again. So we'll excuse this absence. But when Kevin returns the following week, so next week is, like, the 12th. So the following week on the 19th, we're doing an episode. It's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, you can tell this is the dead period for Star Wars. We are going to talk about the sequel trilogy, and we might turn this even into more things. But you're going to talk about the sequel trilogy, and you cannot say one thing negative the entire time. So you don't have to lie about anything, but you can only talk about the good stuff from the sequel trilogy. And there's got to be some punishment for negative stuff.
We're not like vigilant sequel haters. Like we're not like
no. I don't like the whole story.
But man, it is going to be difficult to talk through the plot points without talking about some of the things that tend to be very painful.
Anytime we talk about the sequels, we will say cool things, and then we'll say but. Every time we'll say
always
but.
And,
and so no buts allowed in this one. We're just going to...
Interesting.
And we're not going to be like sunshine pumpers, Disney shills, whatever you want to call us. Like, we're just going to find the very Star Warsy plot points that we think are cool. And we're going to find stuff from all the movies. And it's just going to be talking some good things about the sequels. So it's not this episode yet. So it'd be funny if we just came on and then like hit end. But no, that's not what we're gonna do. So that'll be in a couple weeks. Otherwise, I'm gonna link that article below, so check it out if you're interested, and let us know what you think of this crazy theory in the comments. We appreciate you watching as always, and we'll catch you next time.